Hey guys, and welcome back. This is the fourth episode of my tribute to horror games, and because of the platform I'm going to be going over now, there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of games that were made, and probably hundreds that would meet this criteria. I'm kind of broken it down by genre. That is the late 80s and 90s PC DOS games. Today we're going to just show you the adventure genre. So sit back and enjoy some of the really cool adventure games that were horror themed. Hope you enjoy it. Alright guys, first up is one of my personal favorites. This is Alone in the Dark. It was released in 1992 and has the distinction of being the first 3D survival horror game. It comes standard equipment with tank controls, just like the original few Resident Evil games. Doesn't bother me at all though, because it's a really fun game. This trilogy, which was released for DOS, they were all set in the 1920s and were based on writings from H.P. Lovecraft. So as you can see, the graphics aren't too bad, and you can see it has pre-rendered backgrounds with 3D polygon characters. The story for the original Alone in the Dark starts in 1924, where Jeremy Hartwood, the noted artist and owner of a Louisiana mansion named Derceto, commits suicide in the house by hanging himself. And an antique dealer sends you, Edward Carnby, a private investigator, to find an antique piano. You can also play as Jeremy's niece, Emily Hartwood. She goes to find that same piano because she believes there's a secret compartment in the piano that explains why Jeremy committed suicide. Since Alone in the Dark 2 and Alone in the Dark 3 use the same engine, I'm really not going to show you any footage for that because they look pretty much the same, but I will explain a little bit about the story behind each. Starting with the second one, it picks up on the Christmas of 1924, 3 months after the original Alone in the Dark, and Edward Carnby, the private investigator, and his partner Ted Stryker are investigating a kidnapping of a young Grace Saunders. It leads to a mansion named Hell's Kitchen, where they both enter, and it comes up that Ted is found dead, murdered, and Edward tries to find out what happened. The sequel is much more action-oriented and focuses much more on gunplay, so the puzzles are a little more difficult because of that. And now for the third one. It's in 1926, and Edward Carnby goes out to the Mojave Desert in a ghost town named Slaughter Gulch because of a missing film crew. He has to find out what happens. Supposedly the third one is much more like the first one, where it's more puzzle based as opposed to action. Next up is another really cool adventure game. I really can't call it a point-and-click adventure because it does not have mouse controls. You use the keyboard only. And that is Call of Cthulhu, Shadow of the Comet, another one based off H.P. Lovecraft mythos. It's a very cool game. And as you can see here, yes, that is the likeness of Vincent Price. They actually included that in there as a homage to Vincent Price, a really great early horror actor. The story takes place in 1910 with a young British photographer, John Parker, who gets isolated on a New England town named Illsmouth, and yes, that's kind of a play on Lovecraft's Innsmouth, a place where a lot of his mythos takes place. He goes to witness and photograph the passing of Halley's Comet. The reason John goes is because in 1834, the last passing of Halley's Comet, Lord Bulskin visited town to do the same thing, to watch and observe the passing of Halley's Comet. And basically in that observing, he actually goes insane and spends the rest of his life in a London lunatic asylum. And John learns of this, and after reading his Bulskin's papers, decides to find out exactly what happens. And in doing so, John stumbles upon a sinister conspiracy that he must survive the 3 days between his arrival and the comet's passage, while finding out what happened in 1834. Next up is Realms of the Haunting, a first-person adventure game. Yes, I said first-person. It definitely plays kind of like Doom, but at its core and heart, it is definitely an adventure game because you're collecting items to figure out puzzles in the game. It was released in 1996 for Windows and DOS, and the cool thing about this game, the reason I mention it, is you can actually buy it on Good Old Games as well, and it's already pre-configured. You can just play it on any of the modern systems as well. You play as Adam Randall as he adventures into a haunted house to investigate the mysterious circumstances of his father's death. And as he enters the home, he gets locked in, and at this point he tries to find a way to escape. The game was released to critical acclaim and currently holds an over 90% rating on GameRankings.com. I have to agree, this is a absolutely amazing game. And if you get a chance, definitely pick it up. Like I said, since it's been released on Good Old Games, anybody, as long as you've got a PC or Mac, you can install it and play it.
Good.
Next up is the Gabriel Knight series. The first, Sins of the Father, stars Gabriel Knight, a struggling horror novelist, begins investigating a series of murders dubbed the Voodoo Murders. Gabriel hopes to use the investigation as a basis on his new novel. During his investigation, he discovers a connection to the murders and his lifelong nightmares. He also meets a distant relative from Germany named Wolfgang Ritter. He informs Gabriel of his heritage as a supernatural investigator and passes along the mantle of the Schattenjäger, a modern-day inquisitor. Also, during the investigation, he discovers the nightmares are a result of an ancient curse, and the only way to undo this curse is to embrace his calling and solve the murders.
I'm going out.
Good luck.
I normally don't like to show all the videos in a series in one of these horror episodes, just because it takes up vital time in a video. But for some reason, I feel like I have to make an exception for the Gabriel Knight series, since each uses a different engine. The first is more of a traditional graphic adventure, as you've seen from Sierra, the King's Quest, Space Quest series. Unfortunately, the graphics haven't aged well, but this week, the original creator, Jane Jensen, released a remastered 20th anniversary edition that looks just absolutely amazing. I haven't purchased it yet, but I definitely plan to. The original Gabriel Knight was also voiced by some fairly well-known actors and actresses, such as Tim Curry. He played Gabriel Knight. Mark Hamill played Detective Mosley. Leah Remini plays Gabriel's assistant Grace. You know her from Kevin James's wife from The King of Queens. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. plays Wolfgang Ritter. And Michael Dorn, yes, that is Worf from Star Trek Next Generation, plays Dr. John.
What did you mean when you said Cabri sans corps?
I didn't say that.
Next up is the sequel, The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery. The game uses the same technology developed in Phantasmagoria, another great horror adventure game that I'll be covering shortly in this video. The game shipped on 6 CDs because of the full motion video and live actors. Originally 8 chapters, but due to budget restraints, it was compressed down to 6. In The Beast Within, it's been a year since the events of Sins of the Father. Gabriel has moved to his ancestral home in Bavaria, Germany to write a new novel. When word gets around to the villagers that a new Schattenjäger is in town and reports of a werewolf attack in Munich, they come and compel Gabriel to investigate.
Oh, homie.
Through his investigation and Grace's research, they uncover a link between King Ludwig II, the composer Richard Wagner, and a shadowy figure only known as the Black Wolf. Through that link, the truth comes out about King Ludwig's murder, and the lost opera is discovered from the composer. Unfortunately, Tim Curry didn't look the part because of the use of live actors, and was replaced by Dean Erickson. I feel he did a pretty good job playing Gabriel Knight. as did many critics, since Computer Gaming World gave it its Game of the Year award, and Game Ranking scores the game at over 90%, just like the original.
The name of the detective on the case is Liebe, from the police station near Prinzre Gentenplatz.
And to complete the Gabriel Knight series, this is the third game, Gabriel Knight: Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned. This game breaks away from traditional point-and-click adventures and uses a proprietary 3D engine. It's okay. It's kind of weird because it uses a free-form camera. As you can see here, you actually manually move the camera around the character, and you can actually go anywhere in the room where Gabriel Knight's at. And you can actually even make him go off screen as well, which is kind of weird. The game had fairly positive reviews, but nowhere near as successful as the first two. The story picks up 4 years after The Beast Within, where Gabriel and Grace are invited to Prince James of Albany's mansion and are asked to protect his infant son from bizarre vampire-like creatures he calls night visitors. The plot is even linked to the Knights Templar, the Holy Grail, and even an incredible mystery stretching back to the birth of Jesus Christ. So you can see all three Gabriel Knight games have some pretty interesting stories, from voodoo, werewolves, and even vampires. I highly recommend all three games, and all three can be bought on goodoldgames.com. Now let's go to my final game. That is going to be Phantasmagoria. And finally, we have Phantasmagoria, a psychological horror adventure game released in 1995. This is another massive game released on a whopping 7 CDs. I gotta say, this and its sequel are kind of cheesy, but hey, I love cheesy games just like I love my horror games. Both games remind me a lot of the Sega CD full motion video games back from the 90s. The plot begins with Adrienne Delaney and her husband Donald Gordon moving into a remote mansion. Adrienne, a writer, moves into the mansion hoping to get inspiration on her next novel. After a few days, Adrienne begins having horrible nightmares, and through her explorations, she inadvertently releases a demon. Oh, did I mention that demon possessed one of the previous inhabitants, who then killed his wives? The demon then possessed her husband, and all hell breaks loose. Both games back in the day were very controversial. They include graphic gore and violence, as well as strong sexual content. Both this and the sequel can be purchased on Good Old Games, and I highly recommend them. Speaking of sequels, Phantasmagoria: A Puzzle of Flesh was released in 1996. The game was released on 5 CDs and used the same full-motion video tech that the previous game used. The story begins with Curtis Craig. He seems to be having a mundane life working at a pharmaceutical company named Wintech. Unfortunately, Curtis's life isn't very mundane, as he starts regularly having disturbing visions of gore throughout his office and seems to get messages on his computer, specifically an email from hell offering him a job as a murderer. Oh, and did I mention that 1 year before the game began, Curtis was released from a mental institution. Curtis's mental health problems largely stem from an abusive mother who committed suicide, and a father, before he died, was working on a top secret project, yes, you guessed it, at Wintech, where currently Curtis is employed. Curtis has repressed most of his childhood memories, and over the course of the game he remembers that his father was murdered at Wintech. That's as much as I'm going to go into the story, just in case you guys want to buy the game from Good Old Games and give it a go. And guys, that is it for episode 4. Hopefully in a few days I'll have another episode up. Sorry this one took so long, but it just took quite a while to be able to compile all the video footage that I put together and narrate some of the stuff. Thanks again, guys.